You're listening to the Career Interrupted podcast, and I'm your host, Joy Foster. And this is a fly solo this week. I haven't done a fly solo in a while, so it's really fun for me to do them. And I have a huge and exciting announcement for you. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you will have heard me hear the stories and interview women who have done amazing things in their lives. Many of them have done those amazing things despite adversity. It might have been COVID that knocked them off track, or it might have been having a family, or maybe looking after elderly parents, or being made redundant. There's a million reasons why people have career interruptions. And I hope that you've been inspired by the stories that you've been listening to. Today, I thought I'd do something a little bit different and share a little bit about my career interrupted story and my journey and some of the things that have really helped me as I've navigated those career interruptions. And one of the things that I have done to help me navigate my career interruptions is get coaching and support. And we have an amazing program. It's called the Design Your Dream Life Challenge. It's 12 days long, and it's going to get you all set up for designing your dream life. And so if you want to find out more about that, I'll give you some information at the end, but you can go to techpixies.com/DLC, as in Dream Life Challenge 12, DLC 12. So in just 12 days, you are going to get a really clear idea and vision for what you would love your life to be like over the next 3 years and beyond. So I thought I would just talk about my own career interruptions, because usually I'm interviewing other people about their career interruptions. And I've had a lot of career interruptions. And if we go all the way back to my very first job, I worked at Levi's and I folded Levi jeans. And it was really funny because I was at Oliver Bonus a couple of days ago, and I was purchasing an outfit that I was going to wear to an event. And I brought back to the reception area, I brought back all of my clothes, folded neatly, put back on their hangers. And they looked at me like, no one ever does this. And I learned in my first job that, people would come in and they would try on 50 pairs of jeans and they would just leave them on the floor for me to pick up and put away. And so I got really clever about how I served people at Levi's. And I used to wear a measuring tape around my neck. And I would go up to people and say, what kind of a jean are you looking for? And I'd talk about the cut and the style. And we had a whole catalog with all the different styles and cuts. And so I'd know what kind of cut they were after. And then I would measure their inseam and I'd measure their waist. And I'd say, this is going to save you time because we're going to find your perfect jeans. And I would give them 3 options. They'd try them on. They'd come out happy as Larry, and they had a pair of jeans that they loved, and they didn't leave any jeans behind for me to put away. That was my real innovative hack. But that was one of my very first jobs. And of course, I was a babysitter. I was a nanny for a professional golfer. I got to go to the US Open in New York. That was really fun. And I also nannied for a family of 6 kids. Now all of them are grown up with their own kids, which is really fun to see them with their own kids on Facebook now. So those were my first jobs, nannying and working at Levi's. I also worked at a Renaissance festival. I grew up in Colorado, and they had a Renaissance festival. And I made smoothies and sold turkey legs. So that was one of my very first jobs, where I was out promoting turkey legs and smoothies. And I learned how to project my voice and how to pretend like I was someone else, because I had to wear the Renaissance garb and all that good stuff. So those were my very first jobs. And of course, I wasn't really interrupted. Those careers weren't really interrupted. I was just a student learning how to make a bit of extra money so that I could do the fun things that I wanted. And you know what I spent most of my money on? Technology. I used to buy computers and printers, and the amount of money that I spent, babysitting money that I spent, Levi's money that I spent on technology. I loved technology then. I love technology now. So that theme still runs through. But when I did actually start working, my very first job was my very first professional job out of university was at Bear Stearns, which some of you may know as a company that imploded eventually after the Lehman Brothers imploded. And that was a job working in finance. So I was watching the stock market, and I was telling my boss when to buy and sell stock. And that career was interrupted when I was made redundant. So I had my very first redundancy. It was right before Bear Stearns imploded, and things were going south. But the real reason that I was made redundant from that role, not just the fact that the company was going down, was because I stood up for myself. So I was 21 years old, and I'd been working in this job, and there was a company dinner, and none of the assistants it was called the research sales desk. none of the research sales desk assistants were invited to the dinner. So it was only the people that sat on the desk, which by the way were all men. There were no women that were in the research sales roles. It was an all male cast. And there was one other assistant who was male, and he was invited, but the female assistants weren't. And so I went to the boss, and I went to his office, and I asked him, I said, is there a particular reason why none of the female assistants were invited to the dinner? And he looked at me and he said, yes. He said, because you'd be a distraction. And I said, for what? For who? And he said, for the married men. And that was me being 21 years old. That's only 24 years ago, not that long ago. And so within a week, I left his office, and he said, sit down, let's talk about it. I said, well, I don't really want to sit down and talk about this. And I walked out of his office and I went straight to HR. I told her exactly what happened. And within a week, I was made redundant. Now, knowing what I know now, I probably could have done, something legally against that, but I didn't know it was wrong, what had happened to me. So that was my first career interruption. Now, fortunately, I had a boss that I used to work for at Bear Stearns who really liked me. And when he found out that I was made redundant, he hired me over to work with him at Schwab Capital Markets, which was my second sort of professional career. And I worked there for about a year. And then I started doing archery. My dad had died. I was at Bear Stearns when my dad had died. And I sort of decided that life was too short. And so when I wasn't working, I decided to pick up archery, which was a sport that I thought, I could try and have a go at and make it all the way to the Olympics. I have no idea why I was thinking that. I think that's the ADHD brain, thinking that I could do something crazy like that. But I got pretty darn close. And I told myself that if I made it into the top 25 at the national championships, that I would quit my job at Schwab Capital Markets and I would train full time for the Olympics. And so I did. I placed 25th exactly at the national championships. And I came back, and I had this boss that I loved, and he was the one who had moved me over to this company. And I booked a meeting with him in his office, and I said, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I've decided I'm going to train full time for the Olympics. So that was my second career interruption. First one was a redundancy. The second one was the Olympics. And he was so awesome because he said to me, Joy, when I was your age, I had the opportunity to go and play professional football in Europe, professional basketball in Europe. He was a really good basketball player, a really tall guy, like 6'7". And he said, and I turned it down, and I got married and had kids. And not that he wasn't happy that he'd gotten married and had kids, but he always regretted that he hadn't gone to Europe and played basketball, and instead had settled down and now had, this big house, this big mortgage, and, family, kids, all that stuff. And so he was really excited for me that I had the opportunity, and he wrote me $1,000 check, and he gave me the check. And then a couple months later, they laid off half the staff in my office, and I realized it was probably much cheaper for him to write me $1,000 check than it was for him to write me a severance package. But anyway, so that was my second interruption, and I went and I trained full time for the Athens Olympics. I tried out for the Athens Olympic team. I didn't make the team. They took the top 3, and I was in the top 6. So I didn't get to go to the Olympics as an athlete, but I ended up going to support the team. I was on what's called the shadow team. So if you weren't in the top 3, but if something had happened to the top 3, then I would have gone. So that's called the shadow team. So I went and I supported them, cheered them on, and, got to experience what it was like to be at the Olympics, fuel the fire of my burning desire. I came back and I spent another 4 years training for the Olympics. And that really was my job. I wasn't paid for it, but I lived at the Olympic Training Center, and all of my training was funded. All of my equipment was funded. All of my trips abroad were funded. I went to all over the place: Bulgaria, China, Mexico, South Korea. I got to do some really cool trips as part of that adventure, Puerto Rico, where I won 7 gold medals at one of the world ranking events. So it was a really fun time in my life. There were also some really serious struggles. It was very challenging. Financially, it was challenging. My career was on hold. I was also surrounded by a lot of people that were much younger than me. I was a much older athlete, having started the sport in my 20s. Most people start when they're like 2 or 3. So there were some challenges as well. And I did that for another 4 years until the Beijing Olympics. I tried out for the Beijing team, and I didn't make the Beijing team, but I finished my career ranked 5th in the United States, having also got a 2nd and a 3rd at international championships during that time period as well. So I felt like I really gave it a great go. And I got to the end of that 4-year stint, and I thought, oh gosh, if I'm going to go again, it's, if the pattern continues, because I'd gone from 6th in the country to 5th in the country, I thought if I go another 4 years and I end up 4th in the country, and then they only take one person to the Olympics or 2 people to the Olympics. It's just going to be something I'm chasing forever. And at that time, I was in my late 20s. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have kids. That was important to me. And so I decided that I would, that's what I was going to focus on. And I went to the Beijing Olympics. I knew I wasn't going to make the team, so I applied for a job there. So this is my next career. I was a journalist at the Beijing Olympics. And it was a short 6-week job, but it was perfect. I get to China and I run into an old boyfriend that I hadn't seen for 7 years, hadn't spoken to. We agree to go out for beer and cicadas, and we have a great time. And 10 days later, we're engaged. And I not only moved countries, but, my whole life changed. So not only got engaged, but I then moved countries. So I fly back to California, which is where the Olympic Training Center was. I sold everything I owned. I got on a plane back to Europe, met my fiance in London, and then we spent 10 days in England. And then we went to Switzerland. And that's where we got married and had our kids. And while I was in Switzerland, I managed to get a job at Deloitte. I was working in the marketing department. I had a 6-month contract there, which was going to help me sort of have work until I got married. And then, of course, in Switzerland, when you're married, your husband takes care of you, which was an interesting concept. But that's where the famous story of me in the recruiter's office trying to get a job at one of the banks in Zurich. And I'm talking to them and they're talking to me and they're ready for me to go to the next round of the interviews. And they say, do you have any other questions? And I said, oh, well, no one's explained to me what the maternity leave policy is in Switzerland. And that's when they said to me, well, we can't help you. We can't, that was it. That was the end of the interview. And they walked me to the back of the recruitment office to the fire escape. And they left me there to sort myself out and to get myself home. And I remember thinking on the train, gosh, that's a bit harsh. My corporate career just blew up in flames in front of me. And that was like the only option I had because it was a recruiter and I didn't speak German and I was living in Switzerland. And so, I remember thinking there's got to be other people like me. And that's when I became an entrepreneur, and a totally accidental entrepreneur. I started a blog. A friend of mine at church asked me to help with a website, and we started to help expats who were living in Switzerland, who were trailing spouses. We started to help them. And that was really the first business I built. So my entrepreneurial career came out of a career interruption, shall we say, where I was trying to get a job and couldn't get a job. And I needed to do something with my time, energy, and effort. And so I started a business to help other people just like me. And that morphed into another business, which morphed into what we have today, which is TechPixies. And so my career interrupted journey has many, many different twists and turns. But one thing that I will say helped me along the way, especially as I was building a business and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do long term and what that business was going to look like. I think once you get past the phase of, is my business going to survive, right? We got, TechPixies has been around almost 10 years now. But there were some really tough times. And one of those tough times came about 5 years ago when the company, the business nearly imploded. And I needed to find a new way of thinking, a new way of believing that what I wanted to create was possible. And I went to a weekend event. And on that weekend event, I came away thinking, I can do this. I can do this. And there's a totally different way to approach this than the way that I've been approaching this. And that's when I learned about this dream building mechanism. And so I have taken what I learned on that weekend that was transformational for me. I have taken that information and I have put it into a 12-day Design Your Dream Life Challenge. And you will get an email from me every day for 12 days. You can also upgrade and get a meditation that you can listen to that goes along with it. And it will help you get clarity on your next moves, what you would love in your life. So if you're interested in joining that, go to techpixies.com/DLC Dream Life Challenge, DLC 12. And we're going to hang out for 12 days. And I'm going to give you all of the lessons that I learned over that weekend that helped shift my mindset and help me to think differently about my future. And what I can tell you is my beautiful, squiggly, crazy career has turned out to be pretty awesome. And I'm really grateful for the tools that I learned 5 years ago when I was struggling the most in building my dream business. So check it out, techpixies.com/DLC12. And I hope to see you in the challenge. Bye for now.